Welcome to the Real Estate Guys radio program. Real estate investing is not possible unless we have property rights, the rule of law, and the ability to control our own properties. Today, we're going to take a hard look at the eviction moratoriums throughout the United States and the bigger picture of property rights. We've got three great guests, including two real estate attorneys and a best-selling author you'll love, today on the Real Estate Guys radio program.
Hey, ever wished you could go back in time and do some tax planning? Now you can, just like Marty McFly. Lucky for you, a brand new federal law just made this possible with an EQRP to get tax deductions and reduce your taxable income from last year, so you can use that tax savings to invest in real estate, Bitcoin, gold, even your own business. Whether you're a full-time investor, doctor, government employee, even if you have 5 or 50 employees, the EQRP works and is your secret weapon, and now it's retroactive. Hey, I'm Damian Lupo, and we have your solution. By the way, if you got bad advice and used an IRA for an apartment syndication, you are sitting on a U-bit time bomb. But don't worry, there's a solution, the EQRP. The EQRP company is ready to help you get control of your money, kill U-bit, and help you pay way less taxes. Want to learn more about this strategy? Send an email to eqrp@realestateguysradio.com for my special EQRP report. Paying tax or letting Wall Street suck you dry is dumb. Your first step is freeing your retirement money by sending an email to eqrp@realestateguysradio.com today.
Welcome to the Real Estate Guys radio program. I'm your host, Robert Helms. With me, as usual, it's our co-host financial strategist, Russell Gray.
Hey, Robert.
You know, we pay attention to what's happening in the news in real estate, and if you're a landlord, so do you. And no landlord has been in the dark about the eviction moratoriums that have been going on. I mean, it's crazy. Obviously, when the pandemic hit, initially, Congress passed this, temporary moratorium on evictions that was supposed to end the end of July 2020. Well, fast forward today, more than 11 million Americans are behind on their rent, and that's, single family homes as well as apartments. The National Apartment Association came out the end of July 2021 and said, we're going to go to the courts and we're going to represent landlords. Now we're seeing the action almost to the Supreme Court. What is an investor to do?
Well, I mean, when you think about it, the American people have put up with quite a bit, people all around the world, but we're just going to talk about the U.S. right now because that's where this case is happening. In the beginning, it was, 15 days to flatten the curve. Everybody like, okay, we can shut our business down. We can curtail our travel. We were in the middle of promoting an event. We were kind of taking a wait and see attitude, really trying to see if this thing was going to blow over. We didn't want to just abort the event because we understand what it's like to be on the other side of it. We had some listeners upset with us thinking that we were greedy and selfish because we continued to promote an event in the middle of this flatten the curve campaign. But the reality is we also know that there are people whose jobs, the people who sell the hotel space and all the business that we bring when we do a live event, and that matters to those people. It's their livelihood. And so to cancel that indiscriminately, we weren't ready to do that. So we wanted to take a wait and see. Of course, as we all know, ultimately, it was canceled. Everything shut down. The hotel that we actually were doing business with to do that event is now shuttered and out of business. And that's the ramifications. So now fast forward with this eviction moratorium, and that's really landed heavily on the shoulders of the small landlord, just like the burden of closing the businesses fell squarely on the shoulders of the small business person as opposed to the bigger business. And you might say, well, are we trying to be political here? No, but we are talking about policy. And we're not saying whether the policy is right or wrong. It is what it is. And it's been a lot harder and created a lot more pain. And I think the ripple effect has still yet to be experienced because once these things are let out of the bag, they kind of ripple through the economy and they have impact. And landlords are bleeding out. If anybody knows, if you can't collect rent, then you have to evict and get somebody in who will. And if you can't evict, you can't collect rent, it's hard to make that mortgage payment and you're bleeding out on your balance sheet. And if you bleed completely out, you lose the property, you lose your equity, take that to the next level. If you're a syndicator and you've got investor money in there, now you're talking about losing other people's money. So it's a big, big, big deal. And we have a good friend who's a big time real estate investor who went off on a bit of a rant on his channel about this. And I've never really seen him get upset too many times. Pretty a mellow guy. And usually you can navigate, but sometimes something is so egregious, people have to pipe up a little bit. So we're going to go down that path a little bit in today's show, just to explore it and look at what's happening and what people are doing and how we think it might end.
Well, you know, when you own thousands of apartment units, then you're really paying attention to this stuff. And our guest is our longtime friend, the Rich Dad Advisor for Real Estate and the host of the Real Estate Strategies podcast. Let's say hello to Ken McElroy. Hey, Kenny.
What's up, guys? How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Well, absolutely. We figured you'd want to chime in on this. And I mean, as Russ was saying, you're a pretty even-keeled guy, but all of a sudden, I mean, how much more are landlords supposed to shoulder this burden?
Well, first of all, let me just say, I think in the beginning, everybody was kind of shocked with the lockdown and didn't kind of know where everything was heading. You know, everybody's trying to figure out how to pay their bills, tenants and landlords. So I actually kind of understood it in the beginning.
Sure.
You know, let's see what happens. You know, let's see where all this is. You know, but now, guys, you know, it's been a year and a half, and there's been a lot of PPP money. You know, a lot of money sent at everyone. A lot of unemployment benefits. A lot of stimulus money. The federal government has given states rent relief money. So, you know, a lot of that stuff has made it through the stimulus bills and all that. So the question is then why are they still holding the landlords hostage when they've already spread all that around? And, you know, now they're kind of blaming it on the Delta variant. But the truth is, you know, there are people losing that. Everybody forgets that the small landlord is, you know, by far the majority. There's a lot of horror stories out there with people that aren't getting paid. So, you know, we're just asking to, you know, get our properties back, really. And the other thing I just want to point out is it's not easy to evict someone. There are landlord tenant laws in every state, and they're there for a reason. And some states are a little harder than others. And so, you know, there's all these systems in place to protect the tenants all over the place. And they should be there because there's not always great landlords too. And so I think the issue I have, and the reason I got upset is, well, first of all, I don't believe that the CDC has the authority to, you know, extend over into this arena. And that's kind of where the lawsuit was. And there is one judge, Brett Kavanaugh, that's kind of on the fence, as you guys all know. There's a 5-4 vote at the Supreme Court. So it'll be interesting. But in the meantime, I think that they just let us have our properties back. You know, let us put people in there that can pay and let us pay our bills. That's all we're asking.
You know, we spoke, Kenny, on the show a little bit after the pandemic started, just to check in with you guys about, hey, how are you shepherding your tenants and what percentage you're not paying? And you actually shared, you know, fairly optimistic news that overall the portfolio, sure, you had some tenants who lost their jobs, but overall you were working with tenants and things seemed good. And I think to your point, when it first hit, it's like, yeah, you know what, if none of my tenants have jobs, you know, I'm not some, you know, evil slumlord. I'm going to work with them. I'm going to figure it out. But the other thing we talked about was if I can't collect the rent, well, then what kind of mortgage relief can I have? And yet, as you shared with us, some of the forbearance options made no sense at all. And so now that it's been a year plus, what about that side of the equation? Is there, you know, has your feeling changed on that?
Well, yes and no. I think that they're going to keep kicking the can down the road. But, you know, the lenders that we talk to, they want to be paid.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I mean, a lot of people just focus on that. But let's also focus on insurance. Let's focus on property tax. Let's focus on utilities. Let's focus on maintenance, you know, all the other pieces. There are more pieces involved than just a mortgage. You know, while some people do and will, you know, have that forbearance and mortgage relief piece, and hopefully they have both, you know, there are still, you know, people are digging into and losing properties. There's no question about that. I think that they just want to be able to exercise the laws that are in place and get people in there so that they don't have to lose their life savings too. just like all these small businesses have.
Yeah, it's such a good point. You think most of the landlords are very small businesses. Certainly, there's firms like yours where you've got lots and lots of doors, but as you mentioned, average landlord is a mom and pop. And that's a whole interesting area. You know, there's certainly the folks that think, well, this is a chance to wring those people out of the equation. I'm not sure I bought in completely to that, but that is what's going to happen if we continue to be unable to collect the rent and have to make the mortgage payment. I mean, it's just the age-old attraction of real estate is your tenant makes your mortgage payment. Well, yeah, not if they don't have a job, and not if they do have a job, are accepting the money from the government and don't give any of it to you.
Yeah, and I think people might know that the CDC, they relied on that Public Health Service Act that said that, if we were evicting people, then they would have to move into, other places and with their parents and family and stuff. And that would spread the virus. Well, in the beginning, when we kind of didn't know what was happening, and this is all pre-vaccine and all those things. I get it. I actually do get it. Like, nobody kind of knew at that time what was really happening. And we have so much information. And obviously we have the vaccines now, and we have, the masks, and all those things are in place, plus the money. Don't forget that. There's money that the federal government has thrown at the states, rent relief money, and all that's in place now. And in addition to the employment and unemployment bonuses and all that, they're putting money into the hands of people. And it's getting abused by a number of people, and they're falling under these protections that the landlords are now losing their places.
Hey, one more quick question before we meet our other guests, because what's an investor to do? We've got a couple of real estate attorneys we're going to talk to about what they're actually doing. But share with us this, if you would, Ken. What's your philosophy today as you guys have units that turn over and you're taking applications and you're renting into a unit where you may not be able to get the tenant out? Have you changed any of your screening process, or how is that working for you guys?
Well, no, we haven't. Our screening process has always been the same. Obviously, you run a criminal credit background check. You make sure that they have the financial means. And I think that most of the bigger professional companies have kind of fallen into that, and a lot of smaller landlords. But for us, we haven't changed our stance on the who. We've always kind of fallen in line with people that would communicate with us. And there was a lot of people, Robert, that couldn't pay, and they came to us and they said, "Hey, we're having some financial issues." And we said, okay, let's work on this together. And we did. This is the percentage of people that basically don't communicate.
Yeah, exactly. They put their heads in the sand and imagine it'll all go away. Well, Ken, always great to talk to you. Hey, before we're done today, we're going to give away a signed copy of Ken's latest book for real estate trivia. But before that, we've got another guest or two to share with you. Kenny McElroy, thanks for being back on the program.
Sure, guys. Hey, always great to be on here, and wish you guys the best.
There's our good friend Ken McElroy. More when we come back. You're tuned to the Real Estate Guys radio program, and I'm your host, Robert Helms.
Live nationwide, you're listening to the Real Estate Guys. Find out more at realestateguysradio.com.
If you love real estate and have always wanted to own your own business, listen up. The Real Estate Guys and their panel of experts want to teach you how to go full-time fast in the real estate syndication business. These next few years may go down in history as one of the best times ever to acquire investment real estate. There are deals everywhere if you know where to look and how to assemble the resources. The Secrets of Successful Syndication seminar will show you how to make big money doing big deals from a team of experts that have syndicated projects totaling more than $1 billion. Don't wait for someone to give you a raise or create a job for you. Attend the Secrets of Successful Syndication and learn how to build a team, raise capital, find deals, and make full-time money in 6 months or less. Go to realestateguysradio.com and click on events. All the big players use syndication as a way to diversify risk, optimize profits, and earn big money. You can too. Go to realestateguysradio.com and click on events.
Are you achieving everything you want in life? What if there was a time-tested way for you to get all you've dreamed of? The most successful people in life set goals and keep themselves accountable. But how? The good news is that it's not rocket science. You too can learn the skills and unleash the motivation that will create success in your life. And now is the time. Hi, this is Robert Helms, and I'd like to personally invite you to attend Create Your Future, the 2022 Goals Retreat, January 7th to 9th in beautiful Lake Las Vegas, Nevada. This unique weekend event has been called phenomenal, inspirational, and life-changing by the thousands of people that have attended. Hear from some of them and find out more at realestateguysradio.com under events, or call 888-489-7723 extension 18 to reserve your spot. Get your life back on track, physically, spiritually, and financially. Attend the live in-person 2022 Goals Retreat on the second weekend of the new year. Click events at realestateguysradio.com to register. This is no dress rehearsal. Live the life you were meant to. Visit realestateguysradio.com or call 888-489-7723 extension 18 today.
Hi everyone, this is Jim Rickers, and you're listening to The Real Estate Guys.
Welcome back to the Real Estate Guys radio program. Now in our 25th year of broadcast, we're talking today about a topic that is near and dear to many landlords' hearts, and that is evictions and eviction moratorium. When COVID hit, the world changed in so many ways, and now private property owners who invested for the purpose of cash flow are told, no, your tenants don't have to pay. What can we do about that? Well, let's meet a gentleman who does something about that every day from Pacific Legal Foundation. Let's say hi to attorney Ethan Blevins. Hey, Ethan, how are you?
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, absolutely. It's great the work that you're doing. You've really got your head around this space. Tell us from the legal side, when this all came down, where was your head? How did you guys react as a firm, and kind of what's going on now?
Sure. So these various eviction moratoria around the country kind of started cropping up around March 2020. And at first at the state level, the federal government has played a role in also imposing eviction moratorium. And for a while, we just kind of sat and watched. We wanted to see what happened. We assumed, I think, like a lot of people, this was going to be very brief. And therefore, might not be a lot that could be done, or it might be better to wait and do something afterwards. But after these dragged on for months and months, we decided that people couldn't wait any longer, and we couldn't just sit by any longer, and had to try to do something about it, because we believe that many of these eviction moratoria are vulnerable to legal challenge, that they violate the United States Constitution and sometimes other laws as well. And so we've tried to play a role here in restoring what we believe to be landlords' rights to control the use of their own property.
If you think about it, without the emotional part, there's more tenants than there are landlords. And the idea that, well, everyone needs a break, and because of what's happened with the pandemic, let's make it easier for people. I mean, you can understand that. But at the same time, at the very core of real estate investing are property rights, and there's different tenant landlord law and friendliness in different states. But all of a sudden, kind of across the board, we're being told as landlords that, hey, your tenant doesn't have to pay. So let's talk about some of the things that you guys have done, because what's a landlord to do? One landlord can't do a lot, but in fact, you guys are making a dent.
Sure. So we've represented landlords in Washington State and the city of Seattle, challenging both Seattle's ordinance barring eviction and the Washington State governor's proclamation that barred eviction, and has still continued to bar eviction since March 2020. So we're well on our way to a year and a half where landlords simply don't have any control over their property in Washington State. We've challenged the federal eviction moratorium. That's been in place for quite some time now, not quite as long as the one in Washington. We've also been involved in litigation in California. So there's a lot of states and local governments, and of course the federal government, that are playing a role here. They vary in their intensity. So, for example, Washington really bars eviction for any reason unless there's really a serious safety or health risk being posed, maybe by a tenant engaged in serious criminal conduct. Some just say, you can't evict for non-payment of rent, and the tenant has to show that they are not able to pay. So that's the federal eviction moratorium. So they vary in the degree in which they are really controlling the landlord's ability to repossess their property or get rid of a tenant who's no longer keeping their lease agreement. But all of them really pose this fundamental problem, which is the landlord owns that property. And a fundamental part of owning the property is that you can decide who lives on it. And if someone's not keeping the terms of their contract, that triggers your right under every state law in the nation to begin to try to get that person out of that house.
As real estate investors, one of the things we do is make a strategic decision where to invest. And I know on our criteria list is landlord, tenant law, and is the jurisdiction more friendly to landlords or tenants. But I don't think anybody felt like, wow, this was going to go on for this long. When the pandemic hit and people didn't have jobs, okay, maybe there's a breather for a couple of months. And of course, the stair step of that is that then mortgage companies, if I can't take in rent, how do I pay my mortgage? Mortgage companies were a little flexible too, and they were rewriting mortgages and doing some of those things. But now it's gone on, and so much so recently that there's this big uproar. A lot of folks are getting upset about it. So where do you see this going, and what are the tools that you guys have in your toolkit to help out?
Sure. So the federal eviction moratorium is a good example of sort of this constant extension where there's an expectation it's going to expire. In fact, the attorneys in these cases always say, oh, it's about to expire. It's almost over. And then, of course, it gets reextended. So, and with the Delta variant, it's just impossible to know now what to expect, right? There's an emergency now that doesn't seem to have, there's no light at the end of the tunnel yet. And at some point, landlords are going bottom up. So some states have said, you know what, we're gonna place a moratorium on foreclosure and eviction. And in those situations, it seems like a landlord at least can hold on a little longer. But places like Washington State, there is no guarantee against foreclosure. Obviously, landlords, a substantial portion of their rent, the rent they receive monthly, goes to paying mortgages. It's part of their business model, right? So they've agreed with a tenant that guarantees them regular monthly installments. And if they can't know whether or not that agreement's going to remain in place, I don't know how anyone can invest without the certainty that those fundamental contractual agreements are going to be respected or not.
When you look at the way a real estate transaction happens, typically apartments, and this is true for single family homes, but if you think of a small apartment building, the lender is going to require the borrower to have some sophistication, but also some ballast, reserves. You're going to close the property and you're going to have extra reserves on hand just in case these kind of things happen. But nobody requires a year and a half of reserves. And so you have lenders who came early out with forbearance agreements, and many of them were, okay, for 3 or 4 months, you can forbear, not make your mortgage payment, and either we'll tack it on to the end of the loan, or in month 4, you can pay for all 4 months. And when we thought this was going to be short term, that might have been a solution. But today we are running into landlords that just can't hold their breath anymore. And that's one of the fundamental concerns. And I know you don't focus just on the pandemic. I mean, this is just how it manifested. This is kind of front and center to the kind of real estate law that you guys practice.
That's right. I mean, so we are involved in a lot of property rights issues. We work in an area that's called regulatory takings, where a regulation essentially strips away some aspect of your right to own property. In this situation, an aspect of owning property is the right to exclude someone if they're not keeping their rental agreement. In some cases, landlords are in a bizarre situation where there was never a lease agreement. There's just a squatter in the property they can't get rid of. A fundamental aspect of your ability to own property is to be able to control who's on it. But we also deal with issues about constrictions on use of property, whether you can use it in a certain way that the government disapproves of, whether it's like a short-term rental, for example. A lot of local and state governments now are cracking down on short-term rentals, barring them outright, for example. And we believe that landlords have a fundamental right to use their property in that fashion. Of course, there's other things like constrictions on the number of units or how you can subdivide property. And so we're involved in all of that, trying to uphold property owners' rights to use the property as they see fit and they think is best for themselves and for the use of the property.
So Ethan, this is obviously a big issue that affects landlords. When you're talking about cases and things that you're doing, are those, for a single landlord? Is that a group of landlords association? Are they class action? How is it that you actually go ahead and try to hold these folks accountable?
Sure. So it's often both. So we're challenging the federal eviction moratorium on behalf of some small landlords and landlord associations. So, for example, in Louisiana, we represent a small LLC that has a couple of buildings. And we're also representing the Louisiana Apartment Association. And that's often how these kinds of claims will work. We represent both an association and an individual, because ultimately it's about the individual's right to make a living, to use their property as they see fit, to get a nest egg or whatever reason they might be renting their property. So, and in the Washington and Seattle case as well, we represent small business owners. A lot of people don't seem to know that most landlords, are just over half, are small middle income individuals and LLCs. They don't have the kind of ability to stomach risk for months and months on end without payment like a large corporation might. And of course, those large corporations, they also have payrolls and things, constant expenses that are at risk when they aren't getting income. We know that grocery stores provide an essential thing, food, just like housing, but we don't, prevent grocery stores from prosecuting shoplifters who come in and steal food. Nor should we expect, landlords to go months and months without rent.
Well, there's this ripple effect, right? If I'm a landlord and my tenants aren't paying, and maybe I'm scrounging around to pay the mortgage, but I got to lay off the maintenance guy, and now when your leak happens in your kitchen, we don't have anyone to take care of that. Not only that, the maintenance guy doesn't have an income, and on it goes. And this is why it is so important that people stand up for their property rights. Can you speak to the bigger issue of just the property rights that we take for granted?
Sure. So the founders of the framers of the Constitution really saw property as the fundamental basic right from which all other rights flow, right? So if you can't own a printing press, you're not going to be able to publish papers, or at least you're not going to be able to publish things critical of the government that can decide whether or not you get to keep your printing press.
Or your Twitter account.
That's exactly right. So every right we have really flows from our ability to own and use property, whether it's an object, whether it's a piece of land. And of course, the framers of the Constitution saw our physical bodies as property, right? Everything kind of goes back to that. And so your ability to earn a living is really fundamentally tied to property, right? Your right to just wages, your right to the fruits of your labor. And that's really what this gets down to. I mean, landlords have invested with their hard earnings, often at great expense, with the expectation that they're going to be able to make some kind of return. And when that is stripped away from them, there's really something fundamental, not only monetarily, but in terms of human dignity that's been stripped away from them. Their right to order their life and earn a living is really fundamentally affected when government can take control of that.
Well, Ethan, thanks for your time today. Thanks for the work that you guys do.
Thanks so much.
When we come back, you're tuned to the Real Estate Guys radio program. I'm your host, Robert Helms.
Real estate investment advice right in your mailbox. Sign up for the free Real Estate Guys newsletter at realestateguysradio.com.
Hey, it's Robert Helms. Thanks so much for listening to the show today. I want to personally invite you to come see an amazing real estate market that combines excellent cash flow, offshore diversification, and what we affectionately call lifestyle investing. Come join me December 3rd through 6th in the beautiful country of Belize. The Real Estate Guys have been bringing investors to Belize for more than 15 years now, and our discovery trip is designed to show you the market like nobody else can. Sure, Belize is breathtakingly beautiful, the people are wonderful, and wait till you taste the food. But the real opportunity is the real estate investment potential. Demand for offshore real estate has skyrocketed since the coronavirus shutdown, and with retirees looking for lifestyle, the work-from-home workforce able to be productive from afar, and tourism coming back strong, now may be the perfect time to consider Belize as a place to diversify risk in your investment portfolio. There's all types of opportunity in Belize when it comes to real estate investing, including both long-term and short-term rentals, commercial and retail triple net properties, business opportunities, land acquisition, development, agriculture, and more. And as the only country in Latin America with English as its official language, it's easy to understand the law. Property rights are strong, and contracts are in English. And in Ambergris Caye, a unique situation exists where demand for rentals continues to outstrip supply, creating a compelling environment for investors. So come see for yourself. Join me in December in Ambergris Caye, Belize, as we study the market, learn about the sustainable drivers, and tour lots of beautiful real estate. And like all of our field trips, there are no properties for sale during the weekend. Rather, you'll meet lots of local providers that will help educate you about the market so that you can follow up with them after the trip if the market is interesting to you. You've heard about Belize and the Real Estate Guys for all these years. Now come see what all the excitement is about. Plus, we'll have lots of time over meals and activities to talk about all things real estate. To get the details, go to the website at realestateguysradio.com and click on events where you'll find the Belize Discovery Trip. Once you register, you'll get information about our group hotel rates, as well as full travel details. So join me in Belize December 3rd to 6th. It's a beautiful country with lots of amazing possibilities, and the only thing missing is you. Go to realestateguysradio.com under events, and I look forward to seeing you in beautiful Belize.
Hi, this is Tom Wheelwright, best-selling author of Tax-Free Wealth, and you're listening to Real Estate Guys Radio.
Welcome back to the Real Estate Guys radio program. Thanks for tuning into the show. If you've ever thought about doing bigger deals using other people's money, or you want to passively invest alongside seasoned professionals, there's just a few days left to register for the Secrets of Successful Syndication. It's right around the corner, happening the 17th and 18th of September in Dallas, Texas. Get all the details at realestateguysradio.com under events. We're talking today about property rights, what's happening in evictions, and more. Before we get back to the show and introduce you to yet another guest, it's time to play Real Estate Trivia, your chance to win a prize by knowing today's Real Estate Trivia question. Just a minute, I'll give you the question, and it's something to do with our topic today. It's going to be a little different, so I'll explain that when we get there, but basically, as soon as you think you know the answer, you're going to send your best guess to trivia at realestateguysradio.com. Trivia at realestateguysradio.com. You'll need to send us your name, the answer to the question, and your physical mailing address, because if you're the winner, we're going to get you an autographed copy of Ken McElroy's latest book, The ABCs of Buying Rental Property. That can be yours if you know today's real estate trivia question. Last week, we took a brief diversion from real estate and talked about the precious metals with Brian London and Dana Samuelson. We asked this: in what year did gold production in California peak? Well, believe it or not, in 1852, at 3.9 million troy ounces, approximately 120 tons of gold produced that year, it was the highest production ever seen in California. There were gold in them there hills. Here's our real estate trivia question for this week. As of September 1st, 2021, most U.S. states no longer have a hold on evictions, but a few still do. Name them. Yeah, so here's how it's going to work. You're going to give us the list of the few states that are still enforcing a hold on evictions. You're going to get a point for every one you get correctly. We're going to subtract a point for every one you give us that isn't correct. And whoever has the highest number of points is going to win the autographed copy of Kenny McElroy's latest book, The ABCs of Buying Rental Property. Send that list to trivia at realestateguysradio.com. We'll need your name, your mailing address, and your list of states. In spite of everything in the news, which handful of states still have a hold on evictions? That's today's real estate trivia question. We're talking about kind of the legal nature of real estate, starting with landlords being upset that there are moratoriums, but that's only one way that the government influences housing. And our next guest actually works for the same law firm as Ethan, but has a very different focus right now. Let's say hello to attorney Brian Hodges. Hey, Brian.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for being on today. Your story is a little bigger than just what may happen, this month, this year, this pandemic. We are headed towards increased population, less housing stock, and the bottom line is the country needs houses. You're very involved with keeping the government out of that. Can you help explain why that is and why we need that?
Well, just to take a step back and look at the housing picture in America, why are we where we are? Why are there too few homes being built? And why are there so many people who are priced out of the market? This is a matter of design. Over 100 years ago, the US government adopted this idea of zoning. The idea was originally to sort of plan to avoid nuisance. So you wouldn't have like a pig farm in the backyard of a residential home. So
Right.
you could have these areas developed naturally separate from each other. But the level of control increased over the years to the point where the government created a scarcity by limiting the amount of property that can be developed as residential units and limiting the types of residential units that can be developed. We wound up with too few homes for the number of people who need them, to the point that this should be no surprise. Back in the 80s, Reagan's Committee on Housing noted back then, it's almost quaint to call it a housing crisis back in the 80s, because we remember the prices. We could all afford a home if you were middle class.
Right.
But he saw that there was a housing crisis coming, and he said, the number one solution to this is to pull back on government regulation, to pull back. It's a throttle on the free market, a throttle on people who own property, developing new housing for people. And here we are, 40 years later, and it's only gotten worse. Middle class homes are now eclipsing high sixes into the seven figures in Western states.
Brian, we talk about what creates an increase in demand and therefore value in real estate is some sort of constriction, might be a school district, might be a zoning issue, but we never really thought back until a few years back. We had a gentleman on the show who was explaining how zoning and land use actually created this limitation in many ways. And you're kind of talking about that. Can you give us any more color on that? Because that's a fascinating idea.
Yeah, well, zoning is both good and bad. On the one hand, when you zone a neighborhood, you bring in services that can, service residential uses. Like you bring in schools, you bring in parks, you make it close to transit, et cetera, et cetera. That's the good side. And we all know that you're going to spend more money to get into a home that has amenities near it. But at the same time, it also has a negative effect, because when you say that, say, single family homes are allowed, you're saying that duplexes aren't, you're saying that apartment buildings aren't. And that's really sort of the shadow of zoning. And that goes back to the very first US Supreme Court case that upheld this idea of zoning. It's really, from a modern view, offensive what the US Supreme Court upheld back then. It was the idea that apartment buildings bring in, and this was the court's language, not ours, parasites. They were calling people who live in apartments parasites on the nice amenities that homeowners bring to a community. So their idea was that let's push them away from all of these nice amenities that we're providing homeowners. There may have been questionable justification for that back in the day. Nowadays, there's no justification whatsoever. Multifamily units are necessary. They're a necessary piece of the housing ladder. With today's prices, you need apartments, you need condos, you need multifamily dwellings just so that people can enter the housing market before they move into a nice suburban home.
Seems like everywhere prices are up and there's multiple offers in a lot of places. And so that's anecdotal, but it probably does show that there's a long-term demand for housing. And as we watch, we see the housing stock that is in disarray and needs to be removed or repaired. And then, the growing population. And yet, as you point out, the government's involved in more ways than the ways that might be obvious. And you're working on a project to help make it easier to create more housing. Tell us about that.
Yeah, at Pacific Legal Foundation, we've always been involved in property rights litigation. And really, one of the highest expressions of property rights is the right to build a home on land that's zoned for residential use. So we've taken several cases up to the US Supreme Court fighting for that right. But we've decided in the past few years that we're going to even hone this message further and just say, the problem is these regulatory restrictions on the right and ability to build housing. People are being discouraged, not only by being told you're not allowed to do that, but in order to encourage private people to enter the housing market, which is really the only way we're going to add to supply, is to encourage private owners to build, is you have to provide some sort of certainty, low cost, speed, all of which government regulation interferes with. So we're looking at some recent innovations, like one of the best examples is the proliferation of accessory dwelling unit laws. Those are those little, granny flats, above garage apartments, additions that you can add on a single family lot that adds housing, cheap entry-level housing. That's, really appropriate for people who are in that transitional stage, like your parents aging in place or children that are college age that need desperately to be out of the house but can't afford to be in the housing market. Each person that you provide housing for at that level takes pressure off the bigger housing market.
Yep.
So that's an apartment that's open for somebody who needs it, or an entry-level house, or even assisted living units open for people who need it.
So this is fascinating stuff, because the free market side of it said that developers ought to be able to look out, gauge demand, find land, figure out highest and best use, and so forth. But specifically, what do you think the challenges are, the big impediments? Is it just zoning, or are there other things that also are the culprits?
Well, zoning is where it starts, because zoning is sort of the DNA of the land use system, and that's the thou shalt nots. And as long as those are in place, and as long as they're extremely rigid, the inquiry stops there.
Yeah.
If you, for example, I'm up in the Seattle area, and I believe it's close to 80% of Seattle is zoned for single family residential use only. And that is a massive amount of land that is being left undevelopable. It's barren, but dictated by regulation, because there's plenty of space. Let's skip down to Portland. Portland was experiencing this problem about 10 years ago when they revisited their plan for growth. They looked at the city and realized they are completely built out. Because most of the city was zoned for single family residential use, just about every single lot in Portland had been built, so there was no potential for growth, and all they could do is spread out, which they didn't want to do. So they did something revolutionary, which was to rethink their sort of black letter zoning. And what they did was they lifted this embargo on building in the single family zone. And I earlier mentioned ADUs, accessory dwelling units. They said, well, if the lot's a big enough size that it can house one of these units, why don't we just allow it? And not just allow it, let's give people a right to build these, so that when they go in and apply, they don't have to go through this discretionary process. That's a really grinding and demoralizing process that drives up the time and cost and uncertainty. But now they can just go in, and if they can fill out a checklist, they can build the above garage apartment. And when they did that with one pen stroke, they opened up 116,000 buildable sites. And what's amazing is by doing that, it wasn't just theoretical. In the first year, they had in excess of 2,000 permits issued. Those are 2,000 homes in a city that had the year before said, we're built out, sorry, we've got a closed sign around Portland. That's the kind of revolution that is possible if we do two things: if we remove regulatory barriers and we take steps to encourage private investment. Because that's the other side of this puzzle, is every one of those permit applications was private investment in housing that cost the public nothing.
That's such a good point, because if somebody's going to come in and fund any kind of a real estate deal, they are looking for that certainty you talked about. There's no guarantees in real estate, but the more impediments that are in the way, the less likely they are to bring that money. Commerce associations and the local apartment associations and, of course, chambers of commerce, they all are trying to woo business and investment, and yet there are these impediments. It's great to hear that it's not just theory, that you're starting to see this happen. But I would imagine that, kind of like tenant landlord law, it varies from location to location and state to state. Can you speak about that part?
Oh, yeah, it varies widely. I mean, that's the one thing about land use law, is it is community by community, almost neighborhood by neighborhood, the level of restriction and the differences. There is the beginning of a wave of revolution that at the vanguard are ADUs, because they're small, they're mostly non-objectionable, and because of their size, they really don't have much impact, if any, on neighborhood character, the look of the neighborhood, overall dynamic of the neighborhood. So they become sort of an easy way to test the waters. And it's leading to changes across the nation. We've had California, for example, in 2016 and 2019, amended state law really to dictate to local communities that they have to allow ADUs. And that if their local codes don't allow for them, then those codes are null and void. California recognized that this is an important little piece. It's just a little piece, but we're in enough of a crisis, particularly on the West Coast, that every little piece counts. The same thing, Portland adopted one of these laws that recognizes a right to build an ADU and streamlines the process, adds certainty to it. Other communities, Minneapolis just adopted a law that allows duplexes and triplexes in single family zone neighborhoods. Seattle's been going through amendments, DC. So it's starting to at least sort of crack the facade of zoning being the only way, the strict exclusionary zoning being the only way to plan for neighborhood character.
So, Brian, how do you affect change from an attorney's point of view? Are these individuals that you represent and that starts some sort of precedent, or do you actually go into the city or the county or the state and try to convince them of these changes?
Well, the answer is yes to all the above, but our primary role at PLF has always been to represent the individual against government overreach, government overregulation. So in regard to accessory dwelling units, for example, we've been working, I told you about the state law that was sort of a revolution in California that said that directed communities to issue these permits. Well, as you know, no good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of friction at the local level. It's really hard to turn a battleship. And for so long, these local communities have had such a level of control over anything, any new development, any new use, any expansion of use. They've had such a level of control that they're just not used to this. State law says you're not even supposed to look at it. If they check off this list, you have to stamp it yes. You have to stamp it yes in 60 days. You can't add fees. Just let it happen. Well, in some communities, I have to give credit to Los Angeles. They have been stamping the permits and we have seen thousands of ADUs go in. But right next door, we're seeing every little bit of flack getting thrown at applicants. They're being caught up for years in the permit process, just trying to get their aging mother to live in a separate unit in their home. So we go in and we're representing individuals, trying to get state court decisions. Basically, it's sort of sad, but this is the way that law works. You have to get the law in place, then you have to get the court to say, yes, the law says exactly what it says. Only then will we have the sort of certainty that I was talking about that will encourage private owners to build more housing. Because without certainty, you alluded to this earlier, the only people in the housing market are going to be the big investors who have money that they can risk. And because of that, what they're going to build is not a $50,000 ADU. It's going to be a $1 million housing project because that's what pencils out. Risk makes the price go up.
Well said. Well, this is important work, and we're sure happy that you're sharing this with us and more importantly, getting out there and representing folks. Hey, if someone's interested in what you do at Pacific Legal Foundation or maybe thinks they have a case, what's the best way to reach you guys?
The best way to reach us is to just visit our website at pacificlegal.org. We have a button right on the front page that says contact or submit a case. And that gets submitted, gets reviewed and sent out to attorneys. We get thousands of submissions, so we can't take every case, but the right ones land. And, especially if it regards trying to get accessory dwelling units permitted in California, we're actively looking for cases. Just press that button and see.
All right, there's attorney Brian Hodges with Pacific Legal Foundation. Thanks so much for your time and wisdom today, Brian.
Oh, thanks for having me.
You're tuned to the Real Estate Guys radio program. When we come back, I'm your host, Robert Helms.
Need help with your real estate investment portfolio? Check out the resources page at realestateguysradio.com.
Forbes rated Memphis the best cash flow market in the nation. And our good friend Terry Kerr at Mid-South Home Buyers has been the premier turnkey rental property provider in Memphis for over 13 years. With an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau, Terry has renovated over 750 houses. Real Estate Guys listeners have snapped up hundreds. Discover what these satisfied investors already know. Mid-South's properties are completely renovated with a 1-year warranty and a lifelong rental guarantee. They're affordable, well-managed, and easy to own. Perfect for beginning investors and veterans alike. Get in on the action. Contact Terry and his team via email at midsouth@realestateguysradio.com. For thousands of years of human history, silver has been recognized as money. Then in 1965, the United States took silver out of the financial system. But did silver stop being money? Smart investors don't think so. And ever since, when there are concerns about the quality of the currency, alert investors seek shelter in silver and gold. As the size and frequency of major financial crises grow, silver is attracting a lot of attention. To help better understand the what, why, and how of silver, watch the free 9-part series, Making Sense of Silver. Everything you always wanted to know about silver but didn't know to ask. Featuring 30-year precious metals veteran Dana Samuelson. Send your email requests to silverseries@realestateguysradio.com. Whether you own silver now or you're wondering if it's too late, email silverseries@realestateguysradio.com.
Hey, this is Phil Collin from Def Leppard and Delta D. You're listening to the Real Estate Guys.
And welcome back to the Real Estate Guys radio program. Hey, if you ever wanted to do bigger deals using other people's money, or learn how to invest passively in bigger deals with folks who know what they're doing, come on out to the secrets of successful syndication. Syndication is just putting those big deals together. We spent 2 days with an awesome faculty taking you through the legal, raising money, finding deals, and networking with cool folks. We have more than 200 people already signed up, but we'd love to include you. Just go to the website at realestateguysradio.com and click on events. You'll see the secrets of successful syndication. Well, wow, this is a big, complicated topic, and no landlords are happy when they can't evict, but it's a timely show, and we're right in the thick of it, Russ.
Yeah, well, and, the story's not finished yet by any stretch of the imagination. As we talked about at the open, these things have ripple effects. If you have mortgages going bad, you're going to have mortgage-backed securities, bonds going bad. Lenders are going to be struggling. Commercial banks are going to be struggling. A lot of those people will see bailouts that the landlords aren't getting. So you could, and I do understand the arguments that this is a bit of a wealth transfer. It's a bit of an oppressive policy. It's patently unfair, because it's not really spread evenly. There's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. And so some of us are going to lose some, but we can also put ourselves in a position to win because there's going to be distress. There's going to be properties out there. There's going to be people who are hanging on and bleeding out, but before they lose the property to foreclosure, they may be interested in making some kind of a deal. Right. And so, you have to be someone who can take that problem on and handle it. Part of the reason we're talking to these attorneys and talking to somebody like Kenny that follows it at a high level is we're trying to get some visibility. I don't think when this thing happened, anybody was thinking, yeah, this is going to still be going on in a year and a half. And, Kenny made the point about how if people had to move out of where they were living, they'd have to move in someplace else and the virus could spread. Well, that was the belief system in spring of 2020. But here we are in late summer of 2021, and we know what the death rate is.
Right.
And there are protocols. And so it's less, I would say, and again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an expert, but I've traveled a lot and I've seen places that are in severe lockdown. I've seen places that are fairly open. And I look at the statistics and hear what the death rate is and who the at-risk categories are. And I don't know that some of the things that people feared in the beginning, they fear now. And so the bigger question is, when is it going to end? And what is going to happen to all of the wheels that are already in motion? And is there some opportunity in all of that? And I think the answer to the last question is there actually is going to be some opportunity. One thing that's interesting, we talked about this in the off mic, but I was kind of looking through the Constitution because I do that every once in a while. And the Third Amendment is one that most people don't even know or understand, but it has to do with quartering soldiers in time of crisis, right? When the Brits were dominating, the colonists, they were forcing the colonists to house the British soldiers, and the colonists didn't like that. So when they created the Constitution, they said the government can't put soldiers in your house in times of warfare or in times of peace.
Yeah.
The house, your home is your castle. Private property rights were a major, major, major part of the Constitution and the American dream. A lot of people think the American dream is freedom or owning a business or owning a property. It's all those things, but the fundamental thing is private property. And really, if you think about what private property is, it's the right to own and control your property. Your home is your castle. If I own a property and I don't get to decide who gets to live in it or under what terms, or if I agree to it based on a contract and rule of law, and then the rule changes after I've made the deal, that's like passing a new law after the fact, and we have laws against that too. So I think the idea that you have to house somebody who's a victim of a crisis you didn't create, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I think it breaks the spirit of what this country was founded on and what we base our wealth building on as real estate investor, which is rule of law and private property rights. And you could make the other argument, something we've been talking about a long time. The third pillar of that is sound money, but we've learned how to make money in an unsound money environment. But it's really hard to be a great real estate investor if you don't have rule of law and private property rights right now. That seems to be under attack, and I think as real estate investors, we have to watch this very, very carefully.
Which is exactly why we wanted to have this show today. Big thanks to Ken McElroy, Ethan Blevins, and Brian Hodges for their time and committing to education. We've got a great show for you next week. In fact, in the next few weeks, we've got a whole host of different people you're going to meet from all walks of life. It's going to be fun. It's going to be awesome. And we're also going to be at a lot of events. So come on out and say hi to the real estate guys. Until next week, go out and make some equity happen.
This episode of the Real Estate Guys radio show is brought to you by Paradigm Life. Powerful cash management strategies using life insurance. Learn more at beyourbank.com. Mid-South Home Buyers. Low-cost, turnkey cash flow properties in Memphis, Tennessee. Corporate Direct. Asset protection strategies for real estate investors from attorney and rich dad advisor Garrett Sutton. Find these and other great companies under the Resources tab at realestateguysradio.com. To learn how you can expose your product or service to the Real Estate Guys audience, call 888-489-7723 extension 4. That's 888-489-7723 extension 4. Or use the feedback page at realestateguysradio.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week right here on the Real Estate Guys radio show.